She had stopped moving hours ago, but when the rescuer reached for her, she blinked, just once. And somehow that blink was louder than a scream. The bathroom was the size of a small closet. The door creaked on rusted hinges, opening into a wall of heat, rot, and silence. The floor was slick with filth. Tiles were broken. Mold climbed up the corners like veins on dying skin. And in the center of it all, dozens of bodies. Some were moving, most were not. 44 rabbits. One room. No windows. No air. They had chewed through plastic pipes and torn scraps of cardboard. They had clawed at the wooden door until their nails broke. And they had gone still, one by one, as the air turned thick and hope dried up like water in a sealed bowl. The little one under the towel rack wasn't the smallest. She wasn't the strongest either, but she was the only one who blinked. Her fur was stained yellow, her breath so shallow it barely moved her chest. But she was still alive, and somehow, she had waited for this. The rescuer didn't speak. He couldn't. The lump in his throat pressed like a fist. He reached out gently, not knowing if she would flinch or fade. She didn't move, but her eye opened again, just slightly, and that was enough. They called him quiet. Mr. Langley, 62, lived alone. No children, no visitors. The kind of man you pass by every week without ever remembering his face. His mailbox overflowed, his curtains stayed shut, and every now and then, just faintly, someone heard a squeak or a scratch. But no one knocked, until the smell came. It started in the hallway, then drifted to the staircase. Then finally, it reached the sidewalk. A postal worker called it in, not because he suspected abuse, just something felt wrong. By the time animal control arrived, the heat had baked the building into something sour. Officers gagged as they stepped inside. The floorboards creaked under soaked newspapers and boxes of expired lettuce. And in the middle of it all, bathroom door, sealed with tape and a single rusted nail. Inside, they found 44 rabbits, alive, barely. Some were clinging to each other, others already cold. They found chewed water bottles, empty, plastic bins with no bedding, one bucket half filled. The smell from it was what hit first. Then came the silence. Mr. Langley was seated in the living room, breathing heavily, not surprised, not angry, not even ashamed, just distant. "They're my babies," he whispered. "They love me." No one spoke. One of the officers just stared at his boots. He had started with 3. 2 females, 1 male. No spaying, no neutering, no clue. They reproduced fast, and so did the mess. But he didn't stop, because he thought love was enough. But love without care? That's just control in disguise. The rescuer, Angela, was in her first year at the shelter, 23 years old. She wasn't prepared for this. She had expected a few dogs, maybe a malnourished cat. Not this. She knelt beside the towel rack and gently lifted the tiny rabbit, the one who blinked. Her heart was barely beating, her body stiff, but Angela held her anyway, close, as if warmth could reverse time. And the rabbit? She didn't fight. She didn't cry. She just leaned in, as if to say, "Thank you for being late, but not too late." Outside, the paramedics loaded crates, one by one, some with life, some with memory. Neighbors watched. One man cried. He had lived next door for 8 years and never asked what was behind that door. Not once. Not when the windows stayed fogged for weeks. Not when the scent of ammonia mixed with summer air. Not when the floor shook with movement late at night like something alive was trapped beneath it. He told himself it wasn't his business. Told himself Mr. Langley was odd but harmless. Told himself if the animals really were suffering, someone else would have done something by now. And so he turned the other way every single time. Angela didn't. She didn't turn away when the crates began to shake, when tiny paws pressed against the plastic like they knew what freedom meant but couldn't trust it yet. She didn't flinch when one of the rabbits died in her arms before they even reached the van. She didn't break when the vet told her only half would likely make it through the week. Instead, she went back inside, again and again. She searched the closets, the broken cabinets, even the under-sink pipes where 3 more were hiding in silence. She didn't stop, not even when her mask became soaked with sweat and the smell made her retch. Because once you've seen that many lives stacked like trash bags, breathing, blinking, barely alive, you don't forget, you don't move on, and you definitely don't stay the same. One of the crates near the back held the small one from the bathroom, the one who blinked. Angela had named her after the first breath she heard her take in the van. Whistle. It was faint, almost non-existent, but it was there, like a thread pulling her back from the edge. For the first few days, Whistle didn't move much. She lay curled in the same corner, pressed against the blanket as if waiting for the walls to close in again. She didn't eat, she didn't drink, but she was breathing, and that was enough. Angela sat beside her every evening after shift, whispering soft nothings like she would to a child too scared to sleep. Whistle didn't blink again for 5 days, but when she did, it wasn't from fear. It was from the warmth of Angela's hand, resting near her side without pressure. No cage, no noise, just breathe, just presence. The shelter became quieter after that week, not because the chaos ended, but because the staff learned how to carry it differently. They stopped asking how Mr. Langley could do such a thing. They stopped debating whether he was evil or sick or just lonely. They knew the answer didn't change what happened. What mattered now was what came next. And what came next was a photo. Angela posted it on the shelter's page. Whistle, upright for the first time, nibbling a piece of kale with one ear flopped over and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much, but still chose to stay. The caption didn't plead, it didn't shame. It simply read, "She blinked, she breathed, she's still here." The post was shared over 400,000 times in 3 days. Donations poured in, volunteers signed up. A local rescue offered to build a permanent sanctuary for the hoarded rabbits that couldn't be adopted. And most surprising of all, people started asking questions, not just about Mr. Langley, but about their own neighbors, their own blind spots, their own silences. Angela kept visiting Whistle long after she was moved to the sanctuary. She never said much, just sat there on the grass while Whistle sniffed around her shoes or laid near her leg. One day, months later, a little girl approached the fence with her mother. The child pointed at Whistle and asked what had happened to her ears. Angela paused. She could have told her about the hoarding, the darkness, the silence. But instead, she smiled gently and said, "She survived something terrible, and now she's helping others do the same." Whistle twitched her nose. The child laughed. Sometimes survival looks like blinking. Sometimes it sounds like a breath. And sometimes it's the quiet ones who show us the loudest truths. Not with protests, not with noise, but with survival, with the soft defiance of still being here when everything said they shouldn't be. Whistle never made a sound in those early days, but she didn't have to. Her silence told the whole story. What it's like to be born into a cage you didn't choose, to breathe air that's thick with rot, to grow up knowing only shadows and scratching and the thud of other bodies falling beside you. She had lived through something no creature should, and yet there she was, alive not because someone saved her in time, but because something inside her refused to quit. That quiet, stubborn will became something sacred to Angela. It taught her more than any training ever had, about patience, about trauma, about how healing doesn't happen on a schedule. It happens in whispers, in moments, in trust that must be earned, not demanded. Whistle didn't run when the gate opened. She didn't leap into new arms or race across green fields like some dramatic rescue video. No, her recovery was slower, heavier, but more honest. She'd sit by the door and wait, every day, not because she wanted to leave, but because she wanted to be sure that no one was coming back to lock it again. Angela learned to wait with her, and people watched. The photo of Whistle that had gone viral became more than just a fundraiser image. It became a symbol of resilience, of what we ignore when it doesn't scream. Schools printed it in classrooms. Shelters used it in trainings. Therapists clipped it to their walls. Survivors, human ones, wrote letters to the shelter, saying they saw themselves in Whistle, that her silence mirrored their own. The world didn't change overnight, but in small ways it shifted. a city council passed a new ordinance, limiting the number of unregistered animals per home. A vet clinic started offering free spay and neuter services once a month. A retired teacher began knocking on doors in her neighborhood, not to snoop, but to check, just in case. And Angela? She stayed. She turned down offers from bigger shelters, louder rolls, because she had found something quieter, but deeper, right where she was. Every now and then, she would catch Whistle watching her, not nervously, not expectantly, just watching, as if reminding her that sometimes the greatest change doesn't come from those who shout, it comes from those who endure. Because there is a difference between surviving and being seen. And now finally Whistle was both, a survivor and a witness. Her scars didn't fade, but they softened. And with them, softened something in those around her too. Angela began noticing it first in the way new volunteers approached the cages, not with noise, but with breath held gently in their chests, as if they were entering a cathedral made of fur and fear. There was a reverence now, a kind of hush that wrapped itself around the shelter whenever someone mentioned her name. Because Whistle had come to mean something. Not just a rescue, not just a headline, but a reminder that what we don't hear still cries, that silence doesn't mean safety, that love, if not given with care, can become a kind of violence all its own. She didn't know she was being watched by thousands, that her photo had ended up on advocacy posters in 4 different countries, that college students were citing her case in papers on animal welfare and human neglect, that survivors of domestic abuse found in her eyes a mirror they weren't expecting. She didn't know any of that. She just knew the door stayed open now, that there were hands which reached for her and didn't grab, that the light didn't burn like it used to, that when it rained, she could choose whether to stay out or run back inside. Choice. That was the gift, and choice changed her. She began hopping further, laying closer, sleeping stretched out instead of curled in tight. And one morning, months after the rescue, she did something no one had seen before. She thumped, not in fear, but in joy. It echoed against the walls of the sanctuary like a heartbeat finally unburied. Angela cried when she heard it, not because it was loud, but because it was Whistle's voice, finally speaking, in the only way she knew how. And others listened, not just at the shelter, but everywhere her story reached. Parents read it to their children before bed. Teachers used it to explain kindness without needing to explain cruelty. Inspectors doubled back on complaints that once seemed too small to matter. And most of all, people began knocking on doors that smelled wrong, on places that felt off, on homes they'd passed for years without thinking twice. Because they understood now, the worst suffering is often hidden behind silence and normalcy. And sometimes all it takes to save a life is the willingness to knock. Whistle would never know how many lives she saved, how many animals were rescued because someone remembered her eyes, how many humans found their courage watching her find hers. But that didn't matter, because she had never asked for a spotlight. She had only asked for breath and space and someone to care enough to see her. Not to fix her, not to pity her, just to witness her as she was, as she had been, as she was becoming. Because being seen is where healing begins. It's not the food or the medicine or the shelter walls that do it, not entirely. It's the moment a living being realizes they are no longer invisible, that their suffering is not just theirs to carry in silence anymore, that someone else knows and still stays. Whistle didn't know the names of the people who came after, didn't understand why strangers left flowers by the sanctuary fence, or why little drawings of her began appearing in the mail, scribbled in crayon with words like, "You're brave," or "Thank you for living." But somehow in her quiet way, she responded. She responded by breathing deeper, by trusting slower, by staying alive in a world that had once tried to bury her. Angela noticed the shift, not just in Whistle, but in herself. She no longer walked through the shelter thinking in numbers. Not 44 lives, not 22 survivors, not 5 losses. Now every heartbeat had a story. Every twitch of fur was a language. Every eye contact was a question. Will you see me? Will you stay? She stayed because Whistle had taught her that staying wasn't about time, it was about presence. That a few minutes of real attention could undo years of silence. That care isn't measured by how loudly we love, but by how gently we listen. The sanctuary eventually held more than rabbits. Some came from labs, some from flooded basements, some from crates abandoned on highways. But each one carried a silence of their own. And yet none of them arrived into loneliness, because Whistle was always there, just at the edge of the grass, watching, breathing, being. And sometimes that was enough. Sometimes just knowing that someone else had made it was all it took to believe you might too. The staff began calling it the Whistle effect, the way even the most traumatized rescues calmed when she was near, the way she'd hop, slowly but intentionally, toward the most frightened ones, the way her presence, gentle, patient, unbothered, became a kind of unspoken promise. You're not alone. You're not forgotten. You're not too broken to be loved. No one trained her to do it. She just did, because she remembered. And in that memory, she held space for others to begin again. Not by leading them, not by nudging them forward, but simply by being there, unmoved, unafraid, unshaken, like a tree that had bent in every storm but never broken. She became a kind of quiet anchor for the ones who arrived shaking, panting, eyes wide and wild from the places they came from. There was one in particular, a pale gray rabbit with a missing ear and legs so stiff she could barely hop. Found in a crate behind a highway dumpster, soaked from rain, too weak to lift her head. When the staff brought her in, she didn't respond to touch or food or even warmth. But when they placed her gently near Whistle's enclosure, something shifted. Whistle didn't approach, not at first. She simply turned her body slightly so the new rabbit could see her, could feel her presence. For hours, nothing happened. Then at dusk, the new rabbit leaned forward, just an inch, then another. And by morning, they were laying side by side, not touching, but not alone. It happened again and again, with others. The panicked, the paralyzed, the ones who'd been burned, beaten, starved, forgotten. Whistle didn't heal them. She didn't carry their wounds. But she offered something they didn't even know they needed, a witness. A soft, breathing reminder that survival was not a curse, that the past didn't make them unworthy, that healing wasn't about fixing what was broken, it was about remembering what had always been whole beneath the damage. Angela watched all this with a quiet awe. She'd stopped trying to define what Whistle was. Therapy rabbit? Emotional support? Mascot of hope? None of those labels felt big enough. Whistle was something else. Something older than titles, older than words. She was stillness that didn't judge. She was patience that didn't push. She was the living proof that brokenness and beauty could share the same body. And slowly, the staff began to understand. Maybe that's all any of us really need. Not to be saved, but to be seen, to be sat beside, to be allowed to breathe at our own pace. That was the gift Whistle gave to everyone who came near her. Not with grand gestures or attention-grabbing affection, but with quiet permission. Permission to take up space. Permission to not be okay yet. Permission to heal slowly, unevenly, imperfectly. And in that space, change didn't just happen. It lingered. It deepened. It spread. Angela had begun to notice how differently the team moved around the sanctuary now. Fewer commands, more pauses, less fixing, more presence. They sat longer beside cages. They whispered instead of whistling. They waited for eye contact, for ears to soften, for chests to rise just a little fuller. And even the most hardened volunteers, those who had seen too much, lost too many, seemed softer in her presence, as if Whistle's silence reminded them why they started this work in the first place. Not to save the world, but to be part of someone else's reason to stay in it. Sometimes visitors would come, people curious about the sanctuary, about Whistle. They'd ask where the famous rabbit was, the one from the viral photo. Angela would point to a patch of grass under the old olive tree where Whistle usually rested, half asleep in the shade, ears flicking at the breeze. There was no performance, no spotlight, just a small body, alive and still. a presence you could almost miss if you weren't really looking. But those who were looking felt it. One woman, an abuse survivor, sat by the fence for over an hour without saying a word. When she finally stood to leave, she turned to Angela with tears in her eyes and simply said, "I didn't know I needed her until now." That was the thing about Whistle. She never reached for anyone, but she made it safe to reach, safe to feel, safe to begin again. Angela sometimes wondered if Whistle remembered the bathroom, the dark tile, the bodies piled so tightly she couldn't move, the air that had gone heavy and still. She would never know, but maybe it didn't matter, because Whistle's story wasn't just about survival, it was about what comes after survival, about the kind of healing that doesn't just close wounds but opens doors. Whistle never asked for anything, not rescue, not recognition, not revenge. All she ever wanted was what every living being deserves: space to exist, to heal, to breathe. And in the simple act of surviving, she gave others permission to do the same. Some stories don't end in fireworks or headlines. They end in softness, in a heartbeat that once faltered, now steady, in eyes that once stayed shut, now watching the world unfold without fear, in the space between what was and what's possible. Whistle's legacy isn't one of noise. It's a whisper, a breath, a blink, and it's enough. Because maybe that's how real change begins. Not with shouting, but with listening. Not with fury, but with tenderness. Not with rescue, but with recognition. So the next time you pass a window with closed curtains, the next time a smell catches your throat or sound comes from behind a quiet door, pause. Don't look away. Don't assume someone else will check. Don't let silence win, because behind that door, there might be another Whistle, waiting, watching, barely breathing, but still holding on. And sometimes all it takes to change everything is someone who cares enough to see. So the next time you pass a window with closed curtains, the next time a smell catches your throat or a sound comes from behind a quiet door, pause. Don't look away. Don't assume someone else will check. Don't let silence win, because behind that door, there might be another Whistle, waiting, watching, barely breathing, but still holding on. And sometimes all it takes to change everything is someone who cares enough to see. If you ever suspect animal hoarding, speak up. If something feels wrong, don't ignore it. Make the call. Ask the question. Knock on the door. You could be the reason someone finally breathes again. Whistle survived because someone chose to act. Late, but not too late. Let her story be the reason you don't wait.